So everyone, welcome to our gathering of refugee and migrant women today. And we are so happy to see so many faces here. So before starting, I really request everyone to kindly join our listening, join our talk, but try to keep your mic mute until we ask you to unmute and to share your views. And I also want to let everyone know this conversation will be recorded, so you all know this conversation will be recorded. And I'm so happy, actually. I'm excited, and I totally forgot what I prepare to say as an opening note, but I'm so excited. And as you can see, I made myself when I was preparing before this meeting. I was feeling it's like some kind of special occasion, some like because we are from Pakistan, and I was feeling it's a Eid, like a Christmas and Eid, and I'm dressing up. So as I said, it's a gathering, so I'm so happy. I'm feeling fresh. So like from last 2 months we are having so many webinar because of our work, because of our situation, but today I really felt different. I'm happy, and I really want to share this feeling of happiness, energy, which I always get from you, to share with all of you. So let's get started. First of all, I really like to thank to all my team members who are here. So we have Mari, who is one of the co-hosts, and you just wave. And we have Yafa Kasim. Yafa, you can also wave. And we also have Rim. And if she's here or not, I don't see her yet. So, and special thank to Amina from Nairobi, which is really helping us out for this all digital tools, and they are helping. Oh, Ifat is here. Hi, Ifat. Yes. So this all conversation will be kind of non-formal. We really want to feel the feeling of gathering, but we're gonna talk about very serious issue. We're really gonna present and talk about refugee and migrant women who are living in Europe or anywhere of this world. Their life matters, and why it is important to listen to them as a is really matter. So this is, we will be serious, but we can be very beautiful and attractive, which we are. So let's start our official meeting, our gathering of leading resilience. And why we are want to say the series of this webinar we're gonna start as a leading resilience, because from last few years living in Europe, we are hearing so many difficulties, especially which refugee and migrant women are facing here in Europe. They've been conceived as they do not have the capacity to offer anything to their host countries, or they do not want to work, or because of their cultural barrier, their cultural differences, their religious differences, or their upbringing differences, they do not want to work or enter into the labor market or have high education or get any professional career. But I felt it's not true. Refugee and migrant women who are living in Europe, they have so much to offer, and that's why I'm saying they are leading the resilience. And hi, Bonnie, you just joined. Kindly mute your
Hello.
mic.
Hello, everyone.
Mute your mic.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. So I totally forgot what I was saying, but I will start again. So this is why we are saying, and because of when COVID-19 hit, and we all felt the normal, which was normal, it's not normal anymore. And now we are starting and listening to each other, and we are saying we need to show the solidarity as a woman, as a refugee, as a migrant woman who are living in Europe or any regional region of this world. Like, we are coping together and we are growing together, because we are listening and trying to understand where we were and where we can go. So thank you so much. And by saying this, I really want to say the agenda for today. So we will divided our this discussion in two part. First part, which I will hand over to Ifat in a while. In this session, we will have three speaker, amazing three speakers. Anna Zomnina, sorry, Anna, if I pronounce your name. She's a strategic and policy coordinator of European Network of Migrant Women based in Brussels. And she will share her perspective of what she's hearing from her members her organizational member from different European countries about migrants, especially women, what kind of difficulties they are facing in Europe. Then Ifat will share her organizational work around space, safe spaces of digital connection for unconnected women, because you know this all COVID-19 situation literally force us to do this digital world, which is sometimes so complicated for to understand, and being a person who is totally not aware of digital skills, how they are feeling this connection. So Ifat will talk about that. And then Masuma Turfa, she's Afghan, a refugee, and she's based in Germany, and she will talk about today the empowerment, but what does it mean as an empower woman living in Europe. So hand to over to you, Ifat. Are you here, Ifat? Ifat, are you here?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, hand over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hold on a minute, please. Okay, welcome to this gathering, Leading Resilience. 1 second, please.
I will tell you, if she just texts me because she has her 2 children, and this is life of woman and life of mother, so it's nothing new. So if you have to hand over your children to your husband, I just receive a message for you.
X, yes.
Yes, yes. Your sorry, your ex. So
I'll be back.
okay, so no worries, you can go. As in our start, I just say this is a gathering and this is a live situation which where we are living. And I think while Ifat is not here, I can start with Anna, who is here joining us from migrant European network of migrant women. So Anna, I will welcome you here, and I will give you the floor to you. Meanwhile, Ifat coming to host this session, but I will give the floor to you, and please, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anila. Well, thank you for this invitation in the first place. And I really apologize. We were not very organized in preparing or like participating very actively. And that's because we're all so busy with different things happening at the same time. But nevertheless, I'm happy that we are together, and that you're recording, and that whoever would want to participate later and hear it, they can have access to this information. So, I am here as Anna Zobnina. I'm myself from Russia. I'm a migrant woman for many years. And with the network, we have membership in 23 European countries. And it's mostly migrant women-led organization. Well, this is a policy inside our network, who are really service providers. They're in direct contact with migrant women on a daily basis. Some of them run shelters. Some of them run hotlines for migrant women. Some of them do all kinds of educational activities, awareness raising, legal assistance. Some work with domestic violence. It's a wide range, both in terms of ethnicity and in terms of the aspects or problems that they're addressing. And since the moment when majority of the European countries went into lockdown, we were keeping contact with members in a sense that, I mean, first of all, just to have some kind of exchange and support, because a lot of women felt isolated and depressed and without access to what they would normally have on a daily basis. But also to really understand how migrant women on the ground and migrant women organizations, so this is our real primary concern, how they are dealing with this crisis and what problems they're facing. We've been doing online meetings with our members and also collecting information in written form. And what became clear, that of course that there are cross-cutting and kind of horizontal issues that are affecting, I mean, they would affect all women to start with, like the childcare, for example. You don't even need to be a migrant woman for it. But there are specific additional layers and barriers and difficulties when it comes to migrant women. And just to be clear also what we mean by migrant women, so for us it's quite a broad umbrella term. We include obviously women who are refugee women, or who might maybe they were refugee women when they were asylum seekers, but their application got rejected and now they are undocumented. Or those women who maybe left the hotspots, but they never even registered. So, because we do have like a number of women who never went through the official procedure of seeking asylum. So they're like invisible completely. And then we have women in very different situations who might be with official legal status, either work permits, sometimes it's students, but all those statuses also they're temporary, as we know. They may expire, they might change to another status, or they might get naturalized, like myself. So depending on all of those legal positioning of migrant women within the system, of course there will be different type of barriers that women are facing. The legal status on our analysis is one big aspect that on its own deserve very deep investigation from the perspective of how we manage this crisis. Of course, we know that Europe has been quite late in a general like European response, even though we know that Commissioner Johansson says that they were quite fast, but we would disagree with this. Also, we know that Europe has limited powers due to subsidiarity principle, so they cannot actually dictate the members all the measures, not only in terms of the health measures that would also fall into the area of powers of the states, but also in our case, it's the area of migration and all the how many refugees you accept. We know that the European Commission is taking legal measures against certain countries like Czech Republic because they refuse to accept refugees. But this is a very lengthy process, and effectively most European states, they are managing and setting up migration criteria as well as integration criteria on their own terms. As a result of this, we have we could call it diversity, but it's a very uneven legal situation in different European countries, but also European regions. So we have some regions that have been traditionally more welcoming to migrants, and others who had less migration historically. And when the migration started increasing, it created a lot of kind of social paranoia and fear and some kind of mythology around the people who are entering the country. And of course, there is a difference that we can observe in this way between the Eastern Europe and the Western Europe, but also between the countries that are historically like more rich country and the poorer countries. And then we have the Mediterranean region that was always a recipient of migrants, even before what they call the refugee crisis. And they like Italy and Greece and Spain. They also have their economic setup is quite different in a sense that they have a lot of informal economic activities, and this is where migrant women would be employed or quasi-employed, and this of course also determines how they're facing this crisis. So I also want to say that we last week we had a meeting with the Commissioner Johansson. It was a quite small kind of civil society meeting between civil society and the Commission. And well, I wouldn't be so confident to really comment on this in the sense of any like decisive conclusions. We as a civil society have said what we wanted to say. The Commissioner presented her ideas, how the European society should be preparing itself in terms of managing the post-crisis situation. But what became clear from this is that there are two worrying aspects that we saw. One is that majority of kind of ideas around how migrants in general, and this is quite generic discussion, this is also a point of concern because we're always saying it's not enough to say migrants, we actually need to make a difference between women and men in this conversation. So in this already generic discussion, there is emphasis on economic contribution of migrants to the recovery, to the economic recovery of the European Union. And okay, this is a fair point. We all somehow want or can contribute. However, this should not be, in our view, the framework for the recovery in the first place, because we always argue for a human rights-based approach. And additionally, we wouldn't like to see migrants as being seen as only somebody who can be useful versus useless in this economic recovery. And this, of course, because we know that some women, like that our members are working with, we have large number of women who wouldn't be able to take some kind of either highly paid jobs, or being in care economy and in domestic work, they're already discriminated, and we want to make sure that their rights are being protected and not exploited in this situation. So this was one worrying aspect, and the other one is that a lot of the emphasis, what we heard in this, how we're going to deal with the crisis, and a lot of it is about changing the narrative. And again, this is all fine. We understand that stories matter and positive language matters, and we want to have a different story of migration. What is important is that in these conversations about language and changing the stories, that we do not lose sight of the actual real economic measures that are offered to migrants or other disadvantaged groups, that we do speak about laws in the end of the day, that it's not just words around those laws, but how the laws are implemented. So this is very important to keep an eye on what European Union, European Commission is doing in terms of this kind of managing of narratives, which can be sometimes as an alibi for not managing the real crisis on the ground and the real serious issues, including particularly like economic issues or economic exploitation or violence against women. So this is the policy area, and we do not know yet how exactly Commission will react in terms of, the Commission is working on the new migration pact. It is clear now that this migration pact cannot be created without taking into consideration the actual situation of crisis. Nothing is going to make sense unless it is aligned of how we all together as a society will be coming out of this crisis. So obviously this has to be integrated in the migration pact. And we worry to some extent that there might be a disconnect. Again, here is the reality, this is the crisis, and this is a framework that European Union will create for managing migration that might not necessarily be reflective of reality. So, but we didn't see the draft, we do not know exact measures, so it was like a conversation with the commissioner to exchange our views, let's say. And then there is the reality of what is happening on the ground in terms of migrant women. Of course, I cannot speak for all migrant women, and I cannot speak for all the regions and all the countries, but we can already identify some patterns that we think that they will impact in a substantive way how both the European Union as a whole and as a community will be coming out of this crisis, and how it impacts specifically migrant women. So one of them, of course, is care and domestic work. So this is, we know that this is the area where traditionally women are overrepresented. We know that this is the area where migrant women are overrepresented. In certain countries, like, you can say example of, especially in the Mediterranean region, in Cyprus, for example, it's overwhelming majority. There will be women from Philippines who are in domestic work. In Spain, there are plenty of women from Latin America. And the same, we have like situation in Italy, a lot of them are women from Moldova. In those sectors, some of them might be working with a formal contract, but a lot of them are working either just with a written agreement signed between a family and the woman that has kind of no legal basis, or they work without any contracts at all. And this can be also predicated by the fact that they are undocumented. We do not have the exact number. We know, we heard like from our members that like in Spain there will be about 300,000 women like in this situation, but perhaps the numbers are bigger. And so then we have Italy. So the whole Mediterranean region is very, very large. Perhaps in countries like Sweden, the situation is a little bit different because generally the use of domestic workers like at home is not so extensive. But we know that even in the countries, in the Nordic countries that could be proud of their social system and childcare and support system, for a long time they have been moving towards shifting this work on the shoulders of migrant women again. And this specifically concerns the care sector. So it's not so much domestic work, but the care of elderly, persons with disability, and child care that can be also outside, not necessarily inside the house, but it is managed by women who are running so it's not offered by state, but by some private companies, for example. And we know that there are a lot of exploitations happening there. We did hear from our members in the last meeting that the women, for example, who were taking care of elderly persons, some of their clients with whom they were taking care of, they died. So we know that the loss in the care homes was the most significant of elderly persons. So they lost their jobs, or they were exposed to very, very high risk of coronavirus without protective measures for these women. And on top of this, a lot of them are not compensated. So they're dismissed. There is no contract that can support them. The government doesn't offer to these women, we pay 80% of your salary or 60% of your salary. So there is immediate and absolute risk of extreme poverty for these women. And there are large numbers of them. So this is concerning domestic work. Then we have domestic and care work. Then we have the general situation, of course, of women who might not be necessarily in care work, but they're occupying various other, what they call the low skill positions. And there you will find a lot of women who might be overqualified. We know this, that they're becoming de-skilled with time. But the point is that a lot of them lost income right now, and they are outside of the measures offered by the states. This is the biggest issue. So we go back to the policy level and seeing how actually the governments are covering or not covering certain categories of people, that will be women and migrant women, which will be predicated on two factors: their legal status, number one, and even if they have a legal status, their form of employment might not be consistent with the measures that government is offering.
Thank you, Anna. So sorry.
I have to finish.
I hate myself for doing this, but because
No, it's fine. It's fine.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. No, but I totally agree because you talk about different level of barrier for refugee and migrant women, especially migrant women who are living in Europe, and we talk about the migration pact which they are thinking of, European Commission, but still already refugee and migrant women has distance about all these policy debates. And we talk about my favorite topic is how we can change the narrative, how we can change this narration. So I really want to go to Masuma and then to Ifat, and please stay there if you can, because in this session we really want to have a few questions from the audience, from you as well, because you really sharing, because you not only have the experience, but you also can understand, you can also unpack the really difficulties refugee and migrant women especially facing in Europe. So Masuma, are you ready?
Yes, sure.
So
Sure, yeah.
now floor is yours, and please
Okay,
do
yeah.
your introduction before your talk so people can know better about you. Thank you, Masuma.
Sure, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction. My name is Masuma Turfa, as you see, and I am based in Germany, in Stuttgart. I am doing PhD research now at the University of Hohenheim here on the topic of socioeconomic aspect of international migration, and I take the case study of Afghans and Syrians in Germany. And besides that, we are also working in an NGO that I have co-founded that with some of my colleagues, called Female Fellows. And we are working with migrant and refugee women in the state of Baden-Württemberg, in some regions here in Stuttgart and the neighboring cities here in South Germany. So that's, I think, enough for my introduction. And I'm very happy to be here today. Of course, a small minor correction here, because we are professionally working on the topic. I am a migrant, but not a refugee, as introduced at the beginning. I came as an academic exchange master's student here in Germany back 5 years ago, I would say. Yes, so I would thank you, Anila, and all the organizers of this gathering And it's very important to speak on this crucial topic, of course, especially during this emergency time. And it's, of course, very necessary for us, the advocates, to come together and talk about this important topic, discuss the issues, talk to each other, and empower each other in a way, you know, because the topic that I will be speaking is empowerment of migrant and refugee women currently in Europe. So this is important that we are coming together, discussing the topics and informing each other about the different regions that we are living in. So this is itself somehow connecting with each other. We may work in the future together is itself some sort of supporting and empowerment. So what do we mean by empowerment? You know, this is actually, if we define this, it's kind of granting power or right or authority for someone to perform, to do the activities that they're planning to do. And why do we specifically talk about the refugee and migrant women empowerment? I think it's very clear to all of us, especially during this time, that women in general, if compared with men, have some disadvantages in terms of the responsibility sharing when it comes to the family and childcare obligations that are mostly women that they are responsible for that. And migrant women have this challenges like double. They have the disadvantages of being a migrant and a woman in a different country that they are coming. They have so their unfamiliarities with the language, with the culture, with the labor market, with the whole system. And when you talk about the refugee and asylum seeking women, so the challenges would triple, would even get in several folds. So that's why it's important to really focus on this topic, and specifically on migrant and refugee women. So, and I'm very happy that you have facilitated today's gathering and we are talking about it. So it's very important that women are, we have seen in today's discussion that they're playing the roles of mothers and caretakers of their family at the same time. Besides this call, it's happening, and we see that life, you know, and they are also builders of the communities, the societies, and the economies. So that's why it's important to talk about this matter in more details and discuss how this changes at the time of emergencies, for example. And how could we empower migrant and refugee women is another question that we may refer to. You know that the enhancement of the refugee self-reliance is not something new. It's something that in the discussion of the refugee and migrant integration and inclusion or asylum discussions overall, this is one of the topics that comes in again and again. And Global Compact on Refugees also put the self-reliance of refugees as one of the 4 objectives there to work on it. For example, if we think of that at the emergency cases nowadays, there were several NGOs, social workers, cultural and social mediators, psychological supporting organizations in each of the reception centers. And nowadays there is no one, even no one is allowed to enter these reception centers. Who are doing the work? And how is this done, for example? So these are the questions we may ask ourselves, because they're refugees who are responsible for everything, because there is no one else on the ground except, for example, the emergency health or security staff. So that they are the only exceptions who are present at the moment in the reception centers. If you think about the reception centers are across European Union, and in the rest of the world, you might have heard about the situation of Bangladesh, for example, the situation in Somalia, in Libya. So these are absolutely not comparable with the countries that we are currently living and working with the migrant and refugees. So that's why this topic is very, very important. You know that the asylum application and hearings are stopped in most of the European countries. They are either officially announced that they're not operating, or they do not operate anymore. So these are the points. These each and every limitation during this time brings limitations and challenges for refugees, especially for women. If you think, the other day I was in one of the web conferences that also organized by some of the migrant-led organizations in Europe. People women, Afghan and Syrian women were also reporting the situation from Greek islands, from Mytilene, for example, from Moria camp, how this camp, which is actually planned for 3,000 refugees, accommodate currently 22 to 23,000 refugees. And there are a lot of women who are contributing to a very great extent to this, managing the situation inside the camp. So these are the situations that we do need empowerment of migrant and specifically refugee and asylum seeking women at the time of emergencies. Not only, this is actually the time of emergencies that we notice the problem. The problem does exist even before we think about it. Now we realize it even more. We see that the self-reliance of refugees, the empowerment of them to do the tasks for themselves is really crucial, and we need to really focus on it. And let's not forget that the women do have the potential, they do have the capacity, they do have the ability to act in the emergency situations, but we need to somehow support them, the organizations existing, the policies in place, for example, with the investment, with the education. So education in the first place is the key. Based on the Eurostat statistics, 29% of women born outside European Union, they have only this 29% have university education. And that is, if you compare with the native born women, this is a huge lack that needs to be addressed. And 40% of those with university education are overqualified for their current position. This is another problem that needs to be addressed. It's actually that shows the potential is in the place, and that needs to be addressed. The allocation of the resources, that's actually the resources that's underutilized. The skills of the women and migrant and refugee women in the European Union currently, in some of the member states, you know that there is a lack of skilled labor, and the labor of migrant and refugee women are not allocated the best way possible. And another statistics, like 54% of the migrant and refugee women are those who are born outside the European Union are employed, which is only half of the total population. So I would not go very much into the statistics. They are facts, actually. They do help us understand the situation, but our time and the capacity does not allow us for now. And one thing that's even very much important for the empowerment of the migrant and refugee women is the inclusion and integration of them. How could we solve this issue? We see that there is a very huge gap in the exchange and contact of the local and migrant and refugee women. And if we give the example of Germany, they're based on OECD data, only 12% of refugee women are on daily contact with the local Germans. So this shows how the inclusion and integration of women is lacking. That needs to be addressed. And Anna already mentioned some key categories of the occupations that women are working. Yeah. I would only focus on the health sector, the personal and care workers, cleaners, health associated professionals, and teaching professionals, especially at this time of the emergency. The health and personal service workers are dominated, female migrant dominated sectors. And I would, at the very end, give some good practices as examples. There are a lot of work to be done, as I, through my discussion, I just I refer to. But there are also some good practices. For example, in Germany, there are some projects that are supporting. We, in Female Fellows, we are working on daily basis with migrant and refugee women. We have tandem projects that they are, the main objective is practically bringing one migrant and one native women together. So both of them will be tandems. They are joining our empowerment projects together. They were actually, that was the idea before. We have been working with them the last 4 years almost now, but all the projects are somehow stopped to take place live, but we do have our online programs that's going on. The for the empowerment of the migrant women in Germany, I wanted to say the example of Strong at Work, or Stark im Beruf in Germany, which is working specifically for the mothers with migration background. And they are trying to enter them in the labor market. And the other good practice could be Miriam project in Sweden. It's also going to work specifically directly with the refugee women that are arriving new in the societies, how to support them with the labor market integration. So these could, the projects could be also implemented in other countries.
No,
so thank you very much for the
thank
time.
you, Masuma. Thank you so much. It's really, really what we needed, the really insight, because the COVID-19 shows us like COVID do not discriminate. COVID-19 is gender blind, but this all difficulties, and you talk about inclusion, which is really important. And this because of COVID-19 situation, inclusion becoming more difficult for refugee and migrant women who are living anywhere. And I just thinking, as in the start, Anna also talk about the barrier hurdles. You also talk about how they are getting more exclusion from this all debate and the practicing on the different kind of levels. And I'm just thinking again, as I said, the importance of digitalization, because being a refugee and migrant woman, these spaces are becoming more complicated for us to use these tools. And that's why I really like to bring this point to Ifat, who is doing so much for the refugee and migrant women in Europe through her organization Go to the Change. And there where she is trying to bring all the skills to upskilling level of digital domain is very complicated, and excluded from women in tech is getting so low, and it's her expertise. So Ifat, what you think, you heard about from Anna and Masuma about the problem ahead of us. What do you think the problems which you are seeing in your domain? Yes.
Thank you so much, Anila, and hi, everybody. Again, I'm back. Yes, for a lot of us, balancing childcare with work while being at home with the children is a big challenge. And I think somebody mentioned it already. It kind of encompasses our whole situation in one scene, when my child was standing right here next to me, and I had to bring them downstairs for a minute. Anyway. I think COVID-19 has really showed us how serious this issue is. We've been working on this issue of digital inclusion of women in Europe, particularly my foundation, the Code to Change. It has been working since 2014, 2015, when we first started to raise voice about it. And the reason we started it is because we were doing advocacy work for women in emerging economies. And then as I started talking to women in Europe who were supported by women-led organizations, as we started talking to them, this was when we found out that this skills gap among women who are from migrant and refugee background, it's just so wide. We don't even have exact statistics about how wide that gap is among those women. And to me personally, it came as a surprise. And actually that is what inspired me to start this foundation, was because our mission was, we cannot leave these women behind. When we started the Code to Change, we first had to see what the challenges were. And in addition to the regular challenges that all women face, women of all color, these women were not even considered eligible for these kinds of programs, for digital skills trainings, for skill assessment surveys, because they were categorized as, okay, no, they belong somewhere else, they should go to different kind of jobs. When we started this program, we were amazed at the number of applications that we got, the number of interest that we saw. I have to say, COVID-19 is only, yes, it's showing us a lot, but I feel it's only showing us worse and worse and worse. It's not like we're going towards betterment yet, unless we sit down and we start talking about solutions. Okay, how are we going to address this? How are we going to make these women join? And I think, I personally am a strong advocate for digital skills. I feel that if you, everything being online now, if you don't have access to information, if you don't have access on how to use those tools, you cannot get anywhere in life these days. It doesn't matter what country of the world you're in now. If you do not have the digital know-how, if you do not have the capacity, you do not have the access to the correct information, you do not have the access to opportunities, and you cannot get anywhere in life. And this is, and we've already seen, we're all stuck inside the house, we're in lockdown. People who are able to work from home, they may not see as much of an impact economically, but people who cannot do that, they are in a lot of, they're facing a lot of challenges, basically. I would like to keep this, my talk a bit open as well. I would love to hear some comments or questions at the same time as well as I talk about this issue, because I think this is more, it's more important for me to hear from all of you, the participants of this get together. How have you experienced it? Or the people that you've been working with, how have they have been experiencing it within the network of New Women Connectors, talking with Anila and the rest of the team who are also part of this conversation now. We've been constantly getting requests from women who are now stuck in the house, and they're feeling unsafe, because now if for example there's a situation of a domestic abuse, now they're because they're home more and the abuser is more home, you know, more than normal as well. The kind of messages that we've been getting, the kind of requests that we've been getting, we've quite overwhelmed, and sometimes we try to lead them to certain tools that can help them given the region that they're located in, but we see that they don't have the proper know-how to do it safely, so that they don't put themselves, or that if there are small children involved, so that they don't put them at risk. So this really has shown us how strongly we need to push for economic participation of these women who are not yet part of the digital economy, and how we need to enable them through giving them the skills, the right skills and the right tools, so that they can find opportunities and empower themselves economically, so that they can finally get out of the difficult situations that they might be living in for years and years now. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to give the floor back to Anila. Anila, if there's a question, please let me know.
Yes.
But I think after talking about this topic, I need a minute.
Sure. Thank you, Ifat. So I'm just thinking after hearing from all of three of you. So Anna, I really want to ask a question to you, because in my own experience, because I've been pretty much proactive in the debate around policy of migration, but when we in Brussels, especially, I felt there's a distance. Refugee and migrant women themselves, they do not feel they belong to that domain of policy discussion. And also a similar um, stereotype or imagination or image policymaker feel like refugee and migrant women maybe would love to talk about food, get together, but not about policy. So how you think we can reduce this impression for both stakeholders, because how we can make a bridge, which we already trying to make some kind of bridge, but it's so complicated and it's not that much direct. So what do you think, because you've been working and you're talking about migrant women, but you also have experience of policy domain, so how we can feel more accessible this kind of policy domain where refugee and migrant women can feel that the our party, we can talk about policy?
Okay, well, the simple answer in the colloquial English would be by being horrible pain in the arse. This is what, I don't see other solution to this, because policy really, I mean, it's Brussels, okay, it's institutions, it's very, very rigid, bureaucratic, intransparent, hierarchical structure that is very, very unwelcoming to anybody who is not somehow part of the system. I mean, it's almost like some positions are inherited within the European Commission. We know, and we know also about the corruption, and we know. And so I think that there is no easy way about it. It's like with every group who wanted to have a seat at the table, you know, they started with a little side chair, and then by demanding and putting your voice across. But I think what is also very important in this discussion, we've been here since 2012, and not always successfully, and it's been a difficult journey. The reality is that there is always a risk. The system, we want to enter the system, and the system wants to co-opt you. And this is how it works universally. So we have these dissenting voices. We have somebody who really wants to change the system. The way for a system not to be changed is to take you in and incorporate you and make you part of the system. And this is a difficult balance, because we don't want to be outsiders, but we don't want to be co-opted by the processes with which we fundamentally disagree. So this is a fine line that we're treading as an organization, as individual women, as activists. And of course, I mean, you know, we have to remember, when we speak with people who are in the position of power, they look at you, they look down at you. And this is something that creates psychological conditioning almost, that once we get little bit of our rights, it's almost like, oh, this is so great, that's amazing, they included that. Like, you know, I don't particularly agree with the whole notion of inclusion. I mean, I don't want to be included, first of all, in something that I think is harmful. Secondly, it's not about including, it's about leadership and power and decision making. You can be included, as we know, is what they very often do with migrant women, and they invite you to tell your personal stories, and it's all about personal stories, and like, you know, but it doesn't really change. We want to see the actual change in the documents. So in the conversation that we had with the Commission, you know, for me, it was very clear. For example, the Commission produced communication on the 17th of April about kind of emergency measures and relocation measures. But it's clear from the document there are no women. There's not a single mention of women. And I raised this question, and the response was that they're counted under vulnerable groups. Well, this is not enough for me, because how do I know they're counted there? I mean, there's no footnote that we counted them. I want to see clearly that European Commission adheres to its legal obligations to mainstream equality between women and men, and to take positive actions that are also obligated. It's within the law to make something specific for the women. So it's not enough to say, oh, we also included women. I want to have special programs, special funding, special targets that would say so many women benefited from this program, and a follow-up to this as well. So some kind of evaluation, because we know, okay, you can go through the program without any outcome. And this is about holding people in power accountable. And this is about also knowing the the framework that we're dealing with. So in our experience, a lot of the time we have amazing ideas, but we do not know the law. We never studied. Like when you see that European Union has a lot of very good laws, maybe not so much on migration as such, but for example, on women's rights, we have Istanbul Convention. There are strong instruments that we can pull together, and we can advocate for our specific target group, which is migrant or refugee women. And it's going to be difficult, and it is difficult.
So. Thank you, Anna. So though I have a lot of questions, but I really don't want to make this space only for me. So I just checking the chat, and please everyone feel free to ask the question from the speakers, and you can put your question in the chat box. And I just go to question which I see is from, one is from Asma Niamni, and other from Farzana. So Asma, she's asking about the resources for refugee and migrant women, and what kind of resources, as Masuma, you are talking about empowerment, and empowerment requires tools, resources, capacity building, and training. And second question is about Farzana visibility, and I really want to ask you if about that, like the visibility is so much difficult for different culture. So what do you think the visibility can make and present in the digital zone for refugee and migrant women? So I'll start with Masuma, then Ifat, you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, it's actually a very important question about the allocation of resources to the to women, you know, because when you get active at any level, you need resources to work with. And I was doing one small research on the role of refugee-led organizations, and that was one of the important aspects of it: lack of resources. We do not have resources. We are not actually the Brussels European Commission, the funding for allocated for migration and integration are not allocated to us as a migrant and refugee-led organizations. And there were also some, not honestly, not so many women refugee-led organizations, but there were some members of them who had this, that most of the works are done on volunteer basis. Actually, no one is being paid for the work that they are doing. So over 80% of the work that they are doing are on volunteer basis. The thing is, my suggestions, I may also share that paper with you if you want later in the chat group, a link to that to read through. It's not focused on the women, but it's actually on the role of refugee-led organizations at the policy making in Europe. So there are 7 different countries. I have interviewed both sides. I have interviewed in the commission the policymakers. Do you require the support of migrant and refugee-led organizations at the policy making? And I also asked the refugee-led organizations, could you contribute? And I have called that one supply and demand side of the boat, and what are the problems and the policy recommendations at the end. So the problem is actually lack of access to the resources. And one of our requirement is also to build a quota on the amount of funding for migrant and refugee-led organizations and women, for example. How many % of the funding that's allocated to integration of refugees in Europe could be allocated specifically to the minor groups, and women organizations could come under that. So this is one of the solutions, that they get access to the resources for money, from the money point of view. And the other one is partnership with the mainstream organizations could lead to access to resources. And that's what it's done through the different organizations from Brussels. For example, if you see now the AMIF funding, some of them, they do have this requirement, for example, and there are also some other organizations who are, one of the requirements is that you partner with one of the refugee and migrant-led organization and implement this funding in one of your countries. So this is basically, these are the solutions, and more I would not take the time, but I would share the paper and the link maybe if you are interested to read more.
Sure, that would be great. Yes,
Asma Naimi,
yes.
was that right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Masuma. So back to you, Ifat, because we are talking about here visibility, but I really want to ask you a more difficult question, a complex one, because I'm coming from Pakistan, from South Asia, and being brought up in Pakistan, or having this kind of restriction, still I see there are so many women do not even put their pictures on Facebook. They do not use Instagram, and people think women who are more active in social media, they are not good women. So we are talking here about visibility. How you think we can put a visibility with a good image, and how these barriers, which are becoming more and more thicker, what do you think the resources and this barrier and then these stereotypes? So yeah.
I think this is such a multi-layered question, if you ask me, or the way I understood the question. One, let's just focus on visibility aspect for a minute. Are we talking about visibility of an issue, or are we talking about visibility which could be mistaken as tokenization? There's a really interesting comment here that came in the chat. Farzana, I think, said visibility is sometimes the smoke screen for actual engagement. I found that very interesting. So I think this is something where we have to first think, okay, what are we exactly talking about? Of course, if it's an issue that needs awareness raising, of course, we need to get it visibility, and activists kind of, go to every extent to make sure that that we do get that visibility on that issue. I think Anna also hinted on it, but then there's the issue of when activists or these migrant and refugee-led organizations are invited to come and speak or represent migrant women, a lot of the times, and I think before you get this, before you make a decision, you have to ask yourself, okay, am I trying to achieve the goal or the mission that I'm set out to achieve here by becoming part of this panel? Or is it the mission or the goal of this organization that is inviting me without reimbursement or without any remuneration of any kind? And then you have to, as an activist, balance, okay, what are we getting out of this, right? So I think this is a very complex, and I think we need to actually start a series of workshops for refugee and migrant women, female leaders, on how to do negotiations and teach them about negotiating skills, while trying not to compromise the goal that we have to also raise visibility and awareness about the topics that we're trying to raise awareness about, that we are trying to change. And with regards to your question of online spaces being unsafe to a lot of extent, yes, this is a huge issue. And one can also argue that this is my personal choice, that I don't want my photo to be on my profile picture because I'm afraid it will be misused, or it will be used in a way that I do not want to be used. But I think the ecosystem or the conditions, circumstances around a lot of these women who choose not to put their profile pictures online is not ripe. The world is just not ready yet for their profile pictures to be there, because we've heard horror stories. If you talk about countries like Pakistan, for example, there are so many horror stories that women, their photos are photoshopped, and then they're blackmailed, and then they have to comply to whatever this blackmailer is saying. Because they're not aware of how to use these digital skills safely, they end up giving their very personal, sensitive information, or the abuser gets hold of that information, and they do not know then how to get it back. And there are not a lot of initiatives that are working on it. I think there's a great need to first prepare them to become part of this online world, and then we can encourage them to do more, to get involved socially or to get involved economically. I think that's the first step, that we get them ready and give them that basic know-how about online privacy and digital security and safety. I hope I've answered part of your questions. If not,
No, I think you are very much right. It's so complicated and complex question, but it's intervened and interlinked. So I just want to give a floor to my audience to ask a question. So I see request from Zulekha. She want to ask a question for panelists. So Zulekha, are you there? So you can unmute yourself. So floor is yours.
Yeah, hi, my name is Zuleika, and yeah, I wanted to thank you, Anila, for organizing this. I think it's the first time I've been involved in an event like this, so hopefully my comment is not something that's been discussed previously. But I want to bounce off a bit of what Anna said about institutions and their ability to co-opt. but also just now what Ifat was saying, it kind of triggered me to think that as a group, we're so fragmented. So if you look at refugee women, I myself am a migrant here in the Netherlands, but I'm doing a PhD, so I came in as a high-skilled migrant, and that the groups are so fragmented. We're talking across classes, across racial groups, religious groups. There's so many different intersections, and I feel like maybe a precursor or a pre-step needs to be, how do we as a group build coalition and solidarity across those differences? So how do we make ourselves intelligible to each other so that we show a more solid front in front of the institution? Because trying to represent so many different people from so many different women from so many different backgrounds and class and ethnicity and nationalities is a very, very tough job to do. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So speakers who would like to answer her?
I did hear her comment, but if you could just repeat the question part, I kind of got lost in the conversation.
Yeah. She just gave a suggestion, if we make some kind of solid as a solidarity in front of this institution. So how we can do that, if I'm not perceived your question wrongly, Zulekha. So she really want to see how we can, as a connector, as a solid shield, can protect refugee and migrant women from institution. Right, Anna? I think you are ready to answer the question.
Me?
Yes.
Well, I'm always ready to answer any question, but I don't know how good this answer is. I think it's a tricky thing. Coalition building requires, it can be successful, I think, under certain conditions. So one of them is being very clear where you stand. So for us, for example, we as an organization, we have an analytical framework. We do not come from the perspective, oh, we're migrants. For us, it's a human rights perspective and women's rights perspective. So this is like our entry point. So we don't necessarily, there are certain groups that we will not be entering into coalitions, and for us it's very clear where kind of our boundaries lie. Just in the same way as we work with institutions, that up to a certain point we can have a negotiation, but then we have to react, and some of this reaction can be quite negative. So it's important to know where we come from as an organization, as a group, as individual women. Second is also the purpose, what we're trying to achieve with the coalition building. So sometimes if it's just a pure visibility, a sheer number, and let's say the satisfaction of criteria of diversity, that we want to see other cultures, we want to see other languages, other perspective and conversation. This is one thing. This is quite superficial, but still important criteria. The other one is more substantive criteria, is that if we want to see specific changes implemented in law, in funding, I don't know, it depending on the area that we're working. And here we can build coalitions, I think, around single issue. And in this case, it also becomes a little bit easier. So we do not need to agree on everything, but we can agree on one thing, and we set this priority and we work on it together as a coalition. In this case, it eases kind of the requirements. So it's not coalition which is broad and about everything and everybody. We work on a single issue. So for us, strategically, this is important. And of course, coalition are always very important if we want to achieve the change, because we're speaking, it's like they pass the laws in the parliament. You need to form a coalition to pass you need to have certain number of people in power to vote for this. So yeah, this would be my kind of more technical answer.
Thank you. No, I just felt like nature is working for us today, because her question and the next session we'll go is quite connecting to this. But before going to our next session, I really say a thank you to our all panelists, to Anna, to Masuma, to Ifat, to be part of this first discussion session. And this is a kickstart. We are just beginning to have these webinars, to have this gathering. And now we are going to have a second session, which we're gonna have a speaker of Amina from Ana Lucia.
Excuse me, Anila. Can I interrupt? Because I'm going to leave now.
Yes,
I just
no
want to
worries.
say
Yes, yes.
very big thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
And we'll keep
Also
in
would
touch.
like to
Yes,
thank,
sure. Thank you.
thank you, all of you. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
also have another meeting, as I
Yes,
told
no
you
worries.
before.
Thank you.
So have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.
It was great to meet
Yes.
all of you. Yeah.
So we are just saying
Bye for
bye
now.
to Masuma and Anna, not to everyone. We are here because we have a second session, and we're gonna start with our first speaker, Amina Harsi, who is based in Nairobi, and she's a humanitarian campaign expert. And I think the question with Zulekha you said is very relevant to her talk, because you talk about how we can create a coalition, how we can create a campaign. And I always feel as New Woman Connector, we are a movement. We are not NGO, we are not foundation, but we really like to see ourselves as a movement who really give a connection to each other and give energy and confidence and learning to each other. So Amina, are you here and ready? Amina? So she just texts me because she's Nairobi and maybe her internet is slow. Amina, are you still here? I'm just trying to find her. Where is she? Because I can see her, but I can't hear her.
Amina would need to unmute herself.
Yes. Amina, can you hear me? Yes, so we are living in, quite internet village, and these kind of things make us more dependent. So she's not here. So we're gonna start with Ana Lucia. Ana Lucia, she's very good friend, and she's based in Spain. And I know her from last 3 years when we were part of European Migrant Advisory Board. And I always feel so much inspired by her courage and her motivation for all the migrant women who are living in Spain. And she is working and she's expert in labor market. And here she will share her expertise, her insights, especially not only for migrant and refugee women, but also inside about the COVID-19, how the COVID-19 situation change and push down migrant women who are living in Spain. So Ana Lucia, are you ready?
Yes.
Good.
Hi,
Good.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me well or?
Perfectly. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Anila, for this presentation about me. Thank you very much. And you know that I love you. Okay. I would like to start with some specification about the woman migrant in Spain, because I think it's important, the context. In respect of the origin, they came from Latin America, Africa, and as of Europe. And regarding with the age, they have between 19 and 50 years old. And education, this woman has a secondary and high level education, and the language is Spanish, Arabic, and English. Is the most important in Spanish and English. And most of them work as domestic workers. I listened about the presentation who Anna explained about the domestic workers, and that's true, because the reality and the situation of migrant and refugee women in Spain, I think is the same situation for the other countries in terms of the job insecurity, exploitation, xenophobia, increase of violence with women. And I think with this crisis in the coronavirus, it's more potential, this kind of difficulties or problems with migrants, with women migrants. And besides of this, in Spain, between 30 or 40% of domestic workers don't have employment contract because most of them are in irregular situation. For this reason, they can access to employment benefit of the government of Spain. And this is more important because the government here in Spain, when all this crisis with coronavirus start, in the Spain proposal, these two measures or things to work with women. And the first one was extraordinary subsidy for domestic workers and temporary work for agriculture sector. But this is not the reality. Why? Because this don't make for, can't you imagine a woman from, I don't know, from Peru, from Pakistan, from Russia, they work with not a regular situation in the job. And it's difficult to explain at the government or to participate in this kind of subsidy because they cannot demonstrate that during 2 or 3 or 4 years they work without any contract. And this is the reality. This is very, very difficult because, okay, the government say, don't worry for the domestic workers because we will do a subsidy or a money for you. But what happened with the migrant woman that works in houses without contract? Challenges. I think in Spain there are a lot of challenges. The first is the skills recognitions. Now there are a platform, online platform with migrant, in general, migrant people and refugee also. They don't have documents, but they want to work in a hospital, in a residence with people as a doctor. And the problem is the skills recognition and the regularization. And I think this is the best problem now with women, migrant and refugees also. And this is a big challenge for the government and for us. And obviously, it's very, very important that the woman speak about their problems, because in some social media or newspaper, another people speak about the woman migrant and the problems, difficulties or something like that, but not woman, not migrant woman. And this is a challenge. I don't know if it's because we have a shy, I don't know if is this correct, the word, but it's important to bring the voice for migrant, women, migrant and refugees. Here in Barcelona, concretely, we have a lot of association with migrant women, and they do a very, very high activities for these challenges. And now the oops and now in Barcelona, again concretely, we are working about the regularization of the migrants and refugees. And first of all, we start in the Spain, and the idea is do this this platform to Europe. And obviously all the organization of most of these NGOs or in Barcelona who works with a migrant woman to ratificate the OIT convention about care work with. The idea is equal the care jobs on the domestic work with another kind of jobs. And the idea is organize this a campaign to explain in Europe, yeah, the difficulties, and to put the voice of the migrant woman in the Europe.
Thank you, Anna, Ana
You're
Lucia.
welcome.
So you also highlight a very important component of COVID-19 response to do campaign, and I like to go back again to Amina, if she's here again. So I would like to ask her to share her insight about campaigns and campaigns with gender lens in COVID-19 response, because we are hearing so many gender-based violence is getting high, and how she think the importance of campaign of gender lens in this COVID-19 response. So yes, Amina, thank you so much for joining us so much far away, and so sorry. I think this is a time difference, but we're really happy to have you here, and we are really looking forward from your talk. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Anila, and hi, everybody. I'm just gonna introduce myself on camera, and then I will switch off my camera because my internet's really bad, and then we can basically talk through. So my name is Amina Hersi. I'm the humanitarian campaigns lead at Oxfam International and based in Nairobi. I basically, and to Suleja's point, lead on a intersectional solidarity campaign that works on the intersectionality of women and girls' rights in crisis specifically and post-crisis contexts. And it's really about highlighting the universality of women's rights issues and the struggles that women face when, especially in conflict situations or post-conflict situations, that allow platforms for girls and women as well to organize, mobilize, stand in solidarity with each other, but at the same time share knowledge and expertise, create a safe space for women to discuss whatever is pertinent to them and discuss like what kind of agendas they want to focus on. And then lastly is just to basically connect at a very human level with the kind of struggles that women go through, and just like have that space where you're able to speak and listen, and but also be heard by other women that are probably going through similar contexts or issues with the like you. So I'm just gonna go off now, and then I'll share a bit more about COVID and basically the gendered impact. Thanks. 1 second. So like I guess with any disease that basically we talk about, with the pandemic that we're facing, everybody, and I won't really repeat what the other speakers mentioned, but everyone's at risk all the time, but how those risks manifest and the experience is always gendered. So for example, with migrants and refugees and asylum seekers as well, particularly who are more vulnerable to COVID-19, the structured gendered inequalities and pre-existing social or cultural norms that intersect with their other identities, including their age, ability, legal status, ethnicity, or even just socioeconomic status, determines whether you have access to resources, determines whether you have access to information and services, as well as safety and security, but also determines the kind of care responsibilities that you are basically going to have and have the responsibilities to burden as well. it's really important for any response, and especially for humanitarian responses with such situations, to take account the intersectional gender differences. So it's really important for when basically talking about any kind of response to have a gender analysis of the context, to have systematic gender mainstreaming, meaning that with anything that you're doing, it has to be very cognizant of how the response will basically work together with, I mean, people will receive this response, and whether male or female, whether girl or boy. And then lastly, just to really be specific in terms of the needs of women and girls, because we know that this is always going to be different and completely needed for the female gender. So when for example, when we are basically responding to COVID right now, we always encourage like national or local authorities to recognize the critical role that women and women-led organizations, including refugee-led organizations, play in terms of delivering, designing, and implementing responses, and making sure that the local partners are the ones in the decision-making spaces or in the platforms, because they are living the experience. So without that knowledge, without that expertise, a lot of the tailored designs or response will not meet the criteria or will not be fit for purpose, and really create a gap of vulnerability or exacerbate the vulnerabilities of the people who are already in such a bad situation right now. So there's with COVID, one thing that we've identified, there's 4 broad ways women are impacted and by COVID. But of course, this is with most pandemics, and again, sometimes you can look at it in the scale of a crisis. Protection of women and girls, so gender-based violence, including intimate partner violence and sexual violence, which has been already touched upon by the previous panelists. But just to highlight one aspect that is really not mentioned and is really contextualized for migrant women is the realities that they face of fear of returns, forced returns, or restriction of movement that are discriminatory or because of stigmatization. That is usually not focused when it comes to the protection. The second one is access to information. And I really liked Ifat's presentation, because with access of, with knowledge of how to deal with digital spaces, this is how refugees or migrant women are able to then not only adapt to the information that some privileged ones would get, but would be able to adapt it to the different languages or specific like visual abilities for different like demographics or people who have different understanding and how other people also receive and contextualize information. So having that multi-layered space where women are responsible to act to the information that they're giving or receiving, it's really important and really necessary. And then the last one is just about meaningful engagement and access to services. So whether it's including health and sexual rights and health and reproductive rights, mobility, things that like mobility or social norms or gendered barriers can hinder women and girls from getting these kinds of services. So it's important to have that in mind in terms of how to make sure that we are dealing with these barriers to ensure that both refugee or migrant women are able to access this and know how to then get the services. And then lastly, is just having meaningful engagement, as I mentioned earlier, making sure that women and girls are like coordinating like site plans or community engagement, recommendations for how to prevent or control standards, and also would be really key in terms of like determining or detecting cases that, because really without like within our communities, we have the information, we have the knowledge of what is going on around us. So using and tapping into that kind of information is really important. And that means we're not just extracting, but rather ensuring that we are amplifying and empowering these women to be able to then get and do the kind of leadership roles that we would expect others to come in or step in when doing that. I think that should be it for me. In terms of campaigns, one thing that I've really, and I think if I really mentioned it, and I don't want to really repeat the pointers, but because we find ourselves in such a new territory where a lot of the people, and especially with local-led or community-based organizations, and including migrants and refugees, the kind of situation where there's no more convenings, or we have to use the like digital platforms to basically get information, to be able to access information, to speak or to try and lobby decision makers, it becomes completely difficult, or an opportunity, I would say, for a lot of us to basically see how we can then start to make sure that we are making, like, we're providing the technical expertise or skills to ensure that these people or these coalitions or these organizations have the spaces, have the internet data to actually continue their work, to actually ensure that they're still in the spaces for decision making. Because one thing we're seeing a lot of is a lot of shrinking civic space. So even the spaces where people would be able to go to international forums and you would have access to decision makers or international donors, right now everything is on Zoom, and depending on how close you are to which person is how you get invited. So I think one main thing that we are doing, especially with IMAT, and something that we really want to push, is really how to ensure that we're providing the spaces for women leaders to actually speak their truth and to be the ones who are advocating for their own voices, rather than us being conduits to these issues and recommendations, but also providing that capacity for women leaders to actually know the tools and understand the risks and securities, for them to then be able to pick and choose which ones they want to be actively engaged, but at the same time, which ones they want to refrain or like move back a bit to when it comes to their security or their reservations, depending on whatever it is. Yeah.
Thank you, Mina. Thank you so much. It's really inspiring, and all your insights which you talk about, you really highlight all the debate what we are trying to do from last 2 years in New Women Connector. Like, we need to create a safe spaces for refugee and migrant women where they feel not only confident, connected, but the skills, the ability to say what they think is problem, not what is not working for them, and to make sure this recommendation should be handed over as a valuable, meaningful way to the policy advisor. So I like to, because we are really running out of time, and I can't believe it is almost 1.5 hours, and I feeling like we just started. We're just warming up the discussion. Now I'm like to invite my two speakers. One is Imtihal. She's ready. I hope so. and she will join us from Italy, and she will gonna share her experience and even the insight from the Italy. And then I will request Bonnie from France to share her experience living in her France. So I like to ask, I know so many people are asking questions, but let us done with the speakers for this session, then I will go back to the questions which really want to ask from the speaker. So Ibtihal, if you are there, so the floor is yours. Ibtihal? Okay, good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, please.
Hi everybody, and hi to all the participants. I would like to thank you, Anila, for creating this inspiring platform. I've been following the new women connectors on social media, and some of your activities are very interesting. Thank you, Anna Zubnina, for insisting on changing and improving the narrative and the involvement role of migrant females. Also, thank you, Ms. Sumatova, for your empowering speech and for your dialogue and naming the key issues for us females of a migrant background. Also, thanks to
Sorry, Ibtihal, I'm cutting you.
for mentioning this.
Your voice is not that much clear, so can you, I don't know, your voice, yes.
Now?
Yes, little better, I hope so. Sorry for that. We really want to hear you very clearly because your voice matters a lot.
Okay. I was just saying thank you to all the speakers, and also thanks to Ifadil and Amina Hursti for mentioning the recent increase in the domestic violence. And Lucia, thank you for highlighting the current difficulties in Spain. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm a Libyan political refugee living in Italy for 6 years now. I'm a director of Ashia Association. It provides economic consultation for immigrants and refugees, support startups and small business owners by answering all inquiries related to the economic and financial aspect of the economic project. I'm also a master's student in the International Security Studies at the University of Leicester, United Kingdom, thanks to the Sanctuary Scholarship for Refugees. So I'm going to be talking about the situation in Italy in terms of protection and asylum system during the COVID-19 into 3 parts. First, we will be speaking on the decree. Second part on the current change in the asylum system. Third part on the role of NGOs. So the first part, the decree. On the 7th of April, a decree was made by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in consultation with the Health and Internal Affairs departments. With the newly issued decree, the Italian government has declared its seaports unsafe due to the outbreak and will not authorize the landing of rescue ships until the end of the health emergency, which may be at the end of July, although that could be extended. This announcement was made after CI's rescue ship, Alan Kurdi, the only one at work in the central Mediterranean, who rescued 150 people who were left stranded at sea with no EU country wanting to let them down. Italian boards do not guarantee the necessary requirement for the classification and definition of place of safety in the absence of this feature. The Ministry of the Interior cannot give the go-ahead for landing. The rule concerns rescue cases carried out by naval units flying foreign flag outside the Italian SAR, which are search and security area, search and rescue area. Sorry. Second part, I'm going to speak about the current change in the asylum system in Italy. Can you hear me, Anila? You seem...
Yes, I'm just trying to get very, your voice is still a little bit far. So if you can make it a little bit close. So sorry, I know we are having this technology.
Is it too low?
No, it's good, but it's echo, having some kind of echo or something. It's good. Yes. Okay, it's okay. You can go, then we can.
Okay. As I said, second part, I'm going to speak about the current change in the asylum system in Italy. COVID-19 emergency information and procedure for the recognition of international protection. The spread of the virus is an emergency in Italy and worldwide. For everyone's health, it is important not to leave the place where you live and move only for work needs, situation of necessity, health reasons, return to the place where you live. In the absence of one of these reasons, a penalty is envisaged. To avoid contagions, measures have been provided that affect some aspects of procedure for the recognition of international protection.
Sorry, Ibtihal, do you have headphone? Maybe you can use the headphone.
Let me.
Yeah, because your the insight which you are sharing is really important for us and for our audience to hear from you. And if voice is not clear, it will be like difficult to understand. So while you are setting your mic, why I don't get to Bonnie? Bonnie, are you here?
Yes, Anila, I'm here. Thank
Okay,
you.
so sorry, Ibtihal, you set your mic while I get insight about France. So what's going on in France, and Ibtihal will get back to you. Yes, Bonnie.
Okay, thank you, Anila. I'm Bonnie. Hello, everyone, and I'm grateful to be here. And thank you so much for everything you're doing for women in your different domains and countries. I also wanted to share my experience here in France. I'm a former psychiatric nurse, now entrepreneur and a founder of Kidney Patient Disease Association. So I wanted to talk about refugee women because I work with them on a daily basis as a volunteer, and also I've been one of them, so I can really be in a position to speak about problems they are dealing with during the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, I've not been out there in contact with anyone because myself I'm vulnerable, so I've been doing social distancing strictly. But I would imagine for the people, most of the women who come to their welcoming countries as asylum seekers, for the time being, they don't have housing. What they do is they stay in the streets, they get to places to sleep at night. What happened to them at this lockdown time? I've been thinking also for the people working in the medical fields. Most of them are from migrant backgrounds. How have they been feeling during this time, facing this danger, knowing that it should be mentally a flashback to them as they wake up every morning knowing that they are going to go out there and they are facing danger. Those are thoughts that went through my mind after this pandemic. How can we help these women? And most of them, maybe 90 or 95% are women. What about how they feel for single mothers, which I am, um, being the only one who can go out, but then if you have a health issue, you cannot go out, and yet you have to fend for your children. Also, for their children, for example, you have to consider the gap, the social gap that you have once you get to a new country. Like you don't have all the necessary things like uh, internet, for example, in your house. How do your children catch up with homework and everything? These are the problems that I've been facing as a person, and it has been hard for me, and I can imagine other women went through this as well. So I'm just speaking so that every person from the audience would think about how they can help the next person they meet up, knowing that these are problems that do really exist in families that just go to a new country, welcoming them. And also I've been working with an association called Singa here in France, especially in Lyon, that changed my life, because after you get your own papers, you find yourself alone. You don't know anyone. You cannot work because your school papers are not according to what the country wants. You have either way go back to school, or you have to do something else depending on your priorities. So it's not like women don't want to go direct into policy of the country that is welcoming them. It's just that their priorities shift. Like when I get here, even if I'm a nurse, I'm not going straight to the hospital. I have to know where to live, which school my children are going to. So I'm going to be busy doing these things. And once I'm settled, that's when I'll think about other things, other important things. It's not like all of those things are not important. It's just that the priorities just shift. Another thing also I wanted to tackle is for women cater for their well-being, because if I'm not well in my head, whatever works for me, I will not be able to function. How can we get close to these women and know, like, how do you deal with stress? How do you deal with distress? How do you manage in a crisis or solitude? How do you do that? And once you know how they do it, then you can shift your action work according to what these people need. That's I think that's all I wanted to share on my part, for not taking more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's really amazing insight and your experience which you just share with all of us. So we'll get back to Ibtihal to see if her mic is working better to raise her voice. Yes, Ibtihal, back to you.
Is it better now? Okay, great. So I'm going to be talking about the situation in Italy in terms of protection and asylum system during COVID-19. Into three parts. First part, I'm going to talk about the decree. The second part, I'm going to talk about the current change in the asylum system. And the third part, I'm going to talk about the role of NGOs in Italy. On the 7th of April, the decree was made by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in consultation with the Health and Internal Affairs departments. With a newly issued decree, the Italian government has declared its seaports unsafe due to the outbreak and will not authorize the landing of rescue ships until the end of the health emergency, which may be at the end of July, although that could be extended. This announcement was made after the CI rescue ship Alan Kurdi, the only one at work in the central Mediterranean, that rescued 150 people who were left stranded at sea with no EU country wanting to let them dock. Italian ports do not guarantee the necessary requirements for the classification and definition of place of safety in the absence of this feature. The Ministry of the Interior cannot give the go-ahead for landing. The rule concerns rescue cases carried out by naval units flying a foreign flag outside the Italian SAR search and rescue area. Second part, we're going to speak about the current changes in the asylum system. COVID-19 emergency information and procedure for the recognition of international protection. The spread of the virus is an emergency in Italy and worldwide. For everyone's health, it is important not to leave the place where you live and move only for work needs, situation of necessity, health reasons, return to the place where you live. In the absence of one of these reasons, a penalty is envisaged. To avoid contagion, have been provided that affect some aspects of procedure for the recognition of international protection. The first aspect, concerning applying for international protection, the immigration offices are closed to the public, but an asylum seeker can go and inform her willingness to seek international protection, and their application will be registered as soon as possible. Second aspect, which is asylum scheduled interviews. To avoid the spread of the virus, the offices of the territorial commissions in this period are closed to the public, and interviews are suspended. As soon as the emergency is over, the Commission will notify the applicant on the new date of the interview in the ordinary way. Third aspect, to whom expecting results of their international protection applications. They will receive a communication with the outcome as soon as possible. If in these days they received the decision and their protection has been recognized, they must wait for the end of the emergency to go to the police headquarters to ask for their resident permit. If they have received the decision but it does not satisfy them and want to appeal, they must know that difficulties caused by the emergency, the term for appealing, are currently suspended. So they have more times to file the appeal. However, they can already make contact by phone or email with their attorney or with the legal operator of the center where they are possibly located. Fourth aspect, in case of need for information or a need to send documents to the Commission Territorial, the offices of the Territorial Commissions are closed to the public as well during this period, but an asylum seeker can send at any time an email to the Territorial Commission of reference according to the city. The role of NGOs during this emergency situation. Unfortunately, in just a few days, the COVID-19 pandemic has almost brought the Italian health system to a saturation, starting the most affected northern regions. Imagine how long it will take to collapse small medical centers within refugees camps, or the weak health system of many of the countries that host them. NGO volunteers were involved in the front line alongside with medical staffs in Protezione Civile, but only with an approval letter from the municipality. During the last couple of months, non-government organizations did their best and helped with delivering groceries, masks, and gloves and tools needed for protection against the virus. Thanks to the recent updates on containment measures and sanctions during the emergency COVID-19, which was published by ASGI, Association for Legal Studies on Immigration, a group of volunteered lawyers in Italy, NGO managed to make sure that all refugees and asylum seekers were aware of the regulation and the consequence. For example, crossing the rules will cost a highly priced fine. An early payment will cost 30% less, and if it wasn't paid, it will double up. So NGOs had to make sure that all asylum seekers and refugees were aware to avoid such highly priced fines. Second, if anyone felt sick and knew that she had the symptoms and didn't call the emergency, she will also be fined or a 3 to 18 months of detention, which is the last thing we need for any refugees or migrants or asylum seekers. Because there's, especially in Italy, there's a gap of information reaching the migrants, because all of the information are in Italian language. Unlike Brussels or Germany, everything is available in English and Arabic and French, but in Italy, there's this huge gap of reaching information. So NGO volunteers made sure that all information was reached.
Yeah. Thank you, Ibtihal. I'm so sorry. I'm feeling again very bad. Yes, no, go ahead. Yes, 1 minute. Okay, yes, sure.
Some NGOs organized online language courses to support the continue of education for those who started these courses, weren't only for education purposes, but also to fill the time during the quarantine. One of the examples of the protection asylum system during the COVID-19, a female family camp in a zone named Rivalta contains refugees and asylum seekers. They were provided with hygiene and prevention tools and were also being informed not to leave the premises and call whomever in charge in case needed. There were daily procedures of measuring body temperature and taking records of names and each individual temperature, especially females and family, to be prepared in case of infection. 1 minute. One of the main downsides of the pandemic is the government had stopped Borsa di Lavoro, which is it means scholarship for work. They used to pay refugees who does internship in companies, but the government now has stopped. It caused a major financial crisis, especially for families. Recently, since the 4th of May, which is this Monday, family visiting is allowed and under following the prevention strategies. And since we covered everything, I want to end this with a good note, is that within all of this chaos, honestly, especially in Italy, it brought people together. There weren't much stereotype, like you're a refugee or migrant. No, we were all together in this. And thank you, Anila.
Thank you. We all are together in this. This is a really good message. And thank you so much, Ibtihal, for joining us from Italy. So I'm just thinking and opening the floor for everyone to ask questions for our speakers. And I see in the chat, maybe Ifat and someone else want to ask a question. So please unmute your mic and you can ask a question from our speakers. Ifat? Are you there?
Yes, I am. I thought you were addressing the participants. Hi, everyone, again. Yes, I think I'm going to talk about one question, which is from Bridget, which is directed towards me. Let me also just highlight some of the questions that we see in the chat. Amina, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. This one is for you, and I'll give you the stage after I answer my question. The question is from Ala. She says, I wanted to ask how to approach such topics with community-based organizations, leaders to address gender-based violence, and what information is needed to disseminate within conservative communities, as this is a sensitive topic. Any recommendations on material? We'll go to Amina after that. Then there was another really interesting comment by Farzana. Very good points, she says, being raised by so many of you. What can we do together? Beautiful. Let me answer Bridget's question. Bridget's from Italy, and she asked, this is a question for myself, talking about digital skills for migrant and refugee women in the emergency COVID situation, which is necessary now to have digital knowledge to access platforms. How do you and your association been able to implement this project in your country, and how did you get support? So that's part of the answer. You know, deep breath. To be very honest, when we started working on it in 2015, to get it recognized as a topic was the biggest issue, because they were more concerned about other things than economic integration of these women and then upgrading and upskilling of these women. So that was difficult, and then it really depends on the stakeholder that you approach. If you approach the industry itself, the digital industry itself, the technology industry, you might get some very different, very interesting results, and that is what I would recommend doing if you want to look into this direction, if you want to look on working on this theme. As far as the city government is concerned, or the local government is concerned, at that point they didn't really see it as a very high priority issue. Right now the situation is, yes, we know this is really important, but we really rather focus on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we'll come and think about this. So it's not been very great. However, the private industry has been quite supportive. Technology communities and other communities, independent communities, have come together, and they are doing great work. I would say, if you're looking into working into such a topic, it's best that you look up communities, independent communities, and by that I mean startup communities, the local ecosystem, the local tech ecosystem, women in tech communities. Look into those. They'll be much more able and willing to help you set this up. Or of course, you can also get in touch with us to look at what needs to be done. We're still looking for support to implement this project that we are doing here in the Netherlands, and in some other countries. We're still looking to implement this specifically for refugee and migrant women in Europe, in specific European cities. Well, we're still raising funds for it. So I hope that you stay in touch, and we'll keep you posted about this. I think we now go to Amina for the question that came from Ala. Amina, can you address that very briefly, please? Amina, do we still have Amina?
Sorry, Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I was speaking on mute. So thanks, Ifat and Allah, to your questions. I wanted to just mention a few things that can be done to basically address gender-based violence, which is a sensitive topic, but at the same time, I know with very many cultures, it borders to even a taboo. With any response, I think there has to be a multi-sectoral response that includes basically healthcare, that focuses on sexual rights and health rights. There has to be some form of legal aid, psychosocial support for survivors, as well as other things like education and skill building. To have these conversations in conservative communities, I think there are many ways to approach it, and just to mention a few, is really creating an enabling environment, especially for young women and girls, to basically provide spaces where you're able to develop like self-confidence, awareness, leadership skills, and just bringing people together and raising a collective conscious of what violence is. And then the second like phase, or I guess the second step, would be about like mobilizing the community as a whole. So raising women's voices, raising the situation at a community level. And there are some tools that have been used by different organizations. I'm happy to share with Anila some of our toolkits, but also other organizations that have been very successful in community conversations. And then the last one is about, the second last one is basically the community conversation. So making sure it's a participatory like reflection, drawing on the human rights violations, on ensuring that people know how to claim their rights, know how to just even like know where to get the information or what to do when something or they've been violated. And then that means basically training a few people in that community to be facilitators of this kind of conversations, because you would need that kind of network in any community where people would know who to turn to. And then the last one is just really the use of media and technology to disseminate this information. So making sure that we're using these platforms, whether it's radio, TV, internet, to rally support, to create awareness, to instigate dialogue that basically challenges gender norms around violence against women, and having different people speaking like about it, whether it's intergenerational or it's about champions and different kinds of voices, just really giving that kind of support and narrative would be really helpful. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Amina. I want to go to one last point that was made by both speakers. So one was by Bonnie, and of course, and it's connected to the point Amina made about civic engagement. And the point that Amina made was about the goals of introducing or looking into possibilities for engaging or getting these women engaged in the civic conversation that is going on in their countries, whether using online platforms or the existing fora that exists in their communities, in their cities or countries. And at the same time, Bonnie made a really interesting, very practical point. If I'm a woman of migrant background and I'm still struggling to put my children in school, make them go through the school, and I'm looking for a job, they do not have the luxury to go directly to policymaking forums. So if by that token we will continue to remain in the same kind of situation, how do we address this? Do we then look towards representatives that can raise issue about the concerns that migrant and refugee women face? Do we then ask them to choose a representative? How do we address this? And this is an open question. This is not for Amina or Bonnie or the other panelists. This is more of an open question than how do you think, Anila, to you as well? I mean, how do we then solve this issue?
Thank you for putting a big question on me. I think this question, that's the reason what we are doing on New Woman Connector. We are creating this platform for everyone, for every refugee and migrant woman, to give this confidence, to link them to the policy debate. That's what we are doing in New Woman Connector. And I'm so happy and really want to conclude our discussion here, because we are really out of time. But we had heard from Germany, we heard from Spain, we heard from Italy, from France, from even Nairobi, and we are in Netherlands ourselves. And what we are saying is hitting, though the context is a little bit different, the problem, the challenges and the hurdles refugee and migrant women facing, they are similar, they are same. We heard about stigma, we heard about the barrier of information, we heard about problem of lack of mobility resources, we heard about how we can create more meaningful engagement. We're talking about refugee and migrant women, because the stereotypes still there, that there's so many gender-based violence is getting higher and higher. The health facility is lower and lower for the migrant and refugee women, and how we can change the narratives. So that's what we are doing in this leading resilience at New Woman Connector. And I can't say thank you enough, because you are my power, you are our power. You gave us the energy to move on regardless of challenges, regardless of resources, but we have at New Woman Connector. But we have you. You are our power, you are our human resources, and your stories, your voices matter to us, and we will change, and we will see the new normal which we will create. So thank you so much having all of us to here with me and with the IFAD, with our team. And especially want to say a big thank you to all my volunteers like Sarah Williams. She just joined yesterday from Spain, and many, many more. So sorry if I forgot anyone's name, but you all means a lot to us, a lot to our New Women's Connectors movement. So thank you so much, and have a lovely evening, and stay in touch. Bye.